Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining Junction Reads in November. I'm so excited to have Genevieve Scott here with us today to talk about The Damages. This was a fantastic read. I am going to go into the land acknowledgement because for whatever reason, I nearly forgot the last time. And then I'll go into the introductions. Junction reads into Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wyandot, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Jen is joining us today from Irvine, California, which is the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Akashemen and Tongva peoples. This Turtle Island is still home to many Indigenous people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the communities on their territories. Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone for joining us too.
Me too. As I was saying before we got started, I was excited to talk to you about your first novel when it came out, but then you moved to California and we weren't doing virtual at that time. So here's a number 38 benefit of doing virtual accessible events is being able to invite an author from California. Thrilling.
Well, yeah.
Before we hear you read from The Damages and get into our Q&A about it, would you like to talk about what you're reading right now?
Sure. Well, right now I am about 2/3 of the way through Demon Copperhead. So Pulitzer Prize winner. And I'm really enjoying it. I'd never, I found it kind of instantly magnetic despite never having read Barbara Kingsolver before and never having read David Copperfield either. But it turns out it doesn't matter a lot to really kind of feel very moved and taken in by this very neglected and misunderstood part of the US, and characters kind of grappling for identity despite so many odds stacked against them. So that's what I'm reading right now. And then after that, I am going to read Yara by Tamara Faithberger.
Nice.
Because I always look forward to Tamara's writing. She's probably one of the more original thinkers that I know. So I'm kind of very excited to get into that one.
It's fiction?
It's fiction. Yeah, it's fiction. Nonfiction, I just finished reading Almost Brown. I have this in front of me too, Almost Brown by Charlotte Gill. And I loved this too, both as a memoir of race and identity and also just as a personal history of sort of reflection on growing up and who our parents are and who we are as adults and how that's been shaped by our own kind of family story. So all of them I recommend, and I'm excited to share.
Charlotte's book is definitely on my list. Did you have her as a teacher at UBC?
No, I know Charlotte, but we were at UBC at different times. Did you intersect?
I had her as a teacher. Yeah.
Oh, wow, lucky you.
Yeah. It was, I felt super lucky.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, Kaylee's going to share those titles and links in the chat. So feel free to check them out and maybe add them to your to be read pile. I am really excited to hear you read from this book. I feel like the voice is so brilliant and genuine that I'm excited to hear it in your with your voice. But before I do that, is it okay if I share your biography with everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay. Genevieve Scott is a Canadian writer and writing teacher based in Southern California. She is the author of 2 novels, Catch My Drift, and her latest, The Damages. Genevieve's short fiction has been published in literary journals in North America and the UK, and her short films have screened at festivals worldwide. She was story editor for the indie feature film Jump Darling, starring Oscar winner Cloris Leachman, which has screened at film festivals worldwide. Genevieve currently teaches writing at Laguna College of Art and Design in Laguna Beach, California, and in the limited residency MFA in fiction program at the University of King's College in Halifax. As a volunteer, Genevieve mentors at-risk teen writers through the LA-based nonprofit Write Girl. You can find out more at her website, www.genevivescott.com.
Thank you. The part of the damages that I will read this evening, where you are, is the prologue. And I like to read the prologue because it requires no real kind of context for orienting to where we are, because as a reader, it's the first thing you encounter. And also because some of the other juicier parts of the book are just rife with spoilers that I don't want to disclose yet to those who haven't read the damages yet. So I will begin with the prologue, but I'm happy to answer questions about any part of the book. So the prologue is spring 2020. What I remember best about that week in January is trying to keep track of all the lies I told. Still, they want to hear from me. Elaine Ng called it a conversation. We could meet whenever it suited me. Nothing to bring along, just my memory. I haven't met Elaine Ng, but I've studied her photo on the Burton Jafari LLP website. She is attractive, a year younger than me, if I've calculated her age correctly from LinkedIn. 2 years ago, a Canadian legal magazine named her a top 40 under 40. I'm sure her personal and professional choices have been, on balance, more impressive than mine, which is the main way I size up women now. At one time, the time period she wants to discuss, I considered only prettiness, thinness, and some ever-evolving coolness factor indexed from aesthetics choices like cut of jeans and hairstyle, though even by this standard, Miss Ng scores high. Miss Ng is probably good at what she does, but I don't understand this whole system, her system, that puts so much stock in the reliability of memories. Back when I lived with Lucas, he said he didn't need to remember things like our dry cleaner's name or our friends' food sensitivities because my memory was a spider web, nabbing every detail. At dinner parties, I was proud to supply whatever got lost at the tip of a storyteller's tongue. The name of a child actor, the year of the Albertville Olympics, the author of a book I'd never read. Early in our relationship, Lucas brought me to lunch with his agent, and years later, he marveled at what I could still recall about the evening. The Weimaraner she waved at through the window, her tendency to repeat the phrase, "let's face it," the fleck of terra masalata on the sleeve of her white caftan. I liked being the person who could turn up scraps like these. It was a party trick. It was also, I see now, a distraction, a way to seem clever and observant while avoiding anything of substance. I don't remember much of what the agent said about Lucas's book that night or why they stopped working together several months later. My memory may nab more details than most, but these details don't form a complete picture. More often, they obscure what's there. I could describe to Miss Ng, for instance, the shirt Megan wore to the bar on the night she went missing. It was borrowed from Sue, white with a ruffle over the chest. I once read a teen magazine article on swimwear that described flattering bathing suits for various body types. Not much on top, reach for a ruffle. Megan tried it on at the full-length mirror on Sue's closet door. From the way she bit her lip, I could tell that she liked how it looked. But I don't think this is the sort of detail Miss Ng is seeking. I searched Regis University online and found a news clip from this past March. A segment on students who were refusing to social distance despite the COVID outbreak in the town of Creighton, Ontario. It was the first time I'd seen the campus in over 2 decades. The kids were crowded in front of a reporter's microphone, jackets open, glittery hats jauntily askew, green beer sloshing in frosted glass mugs. One pretty girl narrowed her eyes at the camera. Are we not allowed to enjoy our lives? They sounded so dumb. Were we that dumb? If that week in January had happened even a decade later than it did, this conversation would be easier. I would have photographs, videos, all kinds of documentation. There would be hashtags, hashtag pray for Creighton, hashtag Creighton strong. But we didn't have cell phones or social media in 1998. I didn't take pictures, hardly used email. Ballpark is the best I can do for Miss Ang, if I talk to her at all. The few things that I'm certain of are the things that everybody knows. Megan Main, my roommate, went missing from Alice Cole Hall on January 9th, 1998. Though there were 250 people sleeping in a dorm built for 115 that night, no one saw her leave. It was in the middle of the biggest ice storm in Creighton's history. On the first night, the storm was magical. Our campus was like the atrium of a shopping mall at Christmas. Trees dripping with tinsel fine icicles, rime-crusted windows, sparkles of moisture under the street lamps. But freezing rain fell for days. Thick layers of ice accumulated on trees, windshields, hydro poles, and wires. People lost their homes, their farms. Livestock froze to death. Nearly all of Creighton's 40,000 households were blacked out. As students and residents, we were ignorant of the devastation. We didn't want the chaos to end. An ice storm was a dream come true for us. Classes were canceled. There was nowhere we had to be, no responsibilities, and we weren't afraid of falling on ice. If anyone was going to die, it would be from drinking, a different sort of blackout. Alice Cole Hall, the dorm where I lived, was the center of the party because we never lost power. People said we had power because we shared a generator with Creighton General Hospital. Maybe that's right. I don't really know. I didn't understand anything about power then. And that's the prologue.
It's so funny. It's so funny how, because I didn't reread the novel, it's so funny how that reads now that I know the whole novel. And also that I just had to go through all of my questions to make sure that I wasn't spoiling anything. I think the first thing I want to talk about, and again, I think this speaks to how brilliantly you kind of expose things during the novel. I want to talk about Roz. At first, she comes across as this completely unreliable narrator, not really likable at all. But then on page 52, the narrator says, "The beginning I chose for this story may not be the right one. The truth is, I was a liar before I even got to Regis." And it was funny because even though I had in my head leading up to that point that I wanted to talk about creating an unreliable narrator, in that moment, in imagining her as a liar as a young kid, a liar as like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, it rang differently for me. And I think it's because we're all liars, right? We all tell stories to our friends when we're 10 or 12 or 13 or 14 to make ourselves look good. And that's when I kind of realized Roz is just lying to make herself look better, to make herself look like a different person. So I wanted to talk to you about creating that character, writing her and having her and deciding that she was the one to tell the story.
Yeah, I think you've really touched on something interesting there because, yeah, Roz is not a liar for sport. Roz is a liar because she doesn't believe in herself. She lacks the confidence that what she has to offer is worth very much. So she lies to turn herself into a different kind of person or to project a different image of herself that she thinks will be brighter and shinier and at least, at the very least more palatable to other people. And I think she kind of touches on that later in the novel when she is having coffee with Sue after so many years. A friend she'd had in college, she kind of suggests, well, does it make sense to say that I made things up because I had low self-esteem? And her friend kind of suggests, well, everyone sort of does at that time. But in creating this character, I didn't set out to create someone unlikable or unreliable so much as someone complex and on the other hand, like, and relatable. And I think sometimes when people have asked me about Roz and suggested, she's not always likable, I've had this kind of knee-jerk reaction of, well, she's not that bad. I mean, she's kind of like all of us. She has low self-esteem. She's her own harshest critic. She's looking back on her time in college and is hard on herself. And as well, we're in first person, so we're in her head. So we see all her ugly thoughts and the kinds of thoughts, any one of us have. But rather than kind of try to defend who Roz is, I now sort of feel more committed to the task of, defending the idea in general of writing a character, of writing a female character who is complicated. We still sort of seem to want a lot of our female characters to be nice people or aspirational in some way, to be ass kickers, or if they don't start out that way, to have some big triumph in that direction by the end of a book. And I don't know that that's always the most honest way to write a character. And in doing that all the time, we kind of deny readers the privilege of reading characters who are more like us, who are flawed like us, who make mistakes, who still suffer from regret from those mistakes, who are still kind of working towards moving on. And so I think that's what I was really interested in doing and committed to doing in creating Roz, was this character who had that three-dimensionality, which, unfortunately, sometimes some readers will write her off as unlikable.
Yeah. And it's when you finish the prologue, it is that idea of power, right? Like all she wants is a little bit of power. It's like the Mean Girl movie. It's like the Mean Girl trope. It's the complexity of that is that anyone who works that hard to get power must really need it, right? Because without it, who are they? And then for whatever reason, we as audience members, as readers, only feel happy when they get punished for that.
Yes.
It's so strange. Yeah.
I agree with you. With that, she is grasping for power. I mean, she doesn't think she's interesting on her own. She doesn't think she's attractive on her own. I mean, she needs to, in order to be seen as someone of worth, she's trying to, hitch herself to these other people and tell what narrative she needs to get that pass. Yeah.
But all that being said, I wouldn't have minded if one or two of the characters got just like a little bit of punishment at the end, but I won't mention her. You mentioned Sue's. Yeah. So I mentioned this to you. I mentioned it in a post that I wrote, this conversation that Roz has with her mom, which was super impactful for me. I hadn't really thought about the 90s and the 60s and the, likely the 70s and the 80s in the way that she and her mom talk about it. And I think it's her mom that says something about like, we knew it was improper, like the behavior of men. We knew it was improper. They knew it was improper, but it was seen differently than in the 90s. And of course, Roz talks about the 90s and that, I want to think about how I say this because I don't want it to sound like there's any behavior forgiven in the 90s, but it's not that the omission of things that happened to women in the 90s is an outright lie. Like many are accused of fabricating what happened to them. But like Roz said, it's the experiences of the 90s that are kind of being not reframed, but it's recognizing in this context, in today's context, in the context of the Me Too movement, that the trauma that we people who have experienced sexual assault, in recognizing that that's what it is, right? That it's not the jokey, oh my God, I was so drunk and that happened, or, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened to me. Or, not telling anybody at all. Uh, I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to talk to you about not maybe the research or maybe the depths that you went to in figuring out the power dynamics and the sexual experiences of women through, the last 60 or 70 years.
I think
That's probably a big question.
no, I'm thinking about so one of the things I've been interested in terms of response to the damages is a lot of older women have told me that that they relate to it despite the fact that the university experience being described in the 90s, happened 2 decades or possibly more after their own kind of coming of age.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, so I've been thinking about that too. When I was writing the book, because I think, because power imbalances have always existed and were just navigated in different ways. So I think Roz's interpretation, Roz's mother talks about how in the 60s, she had worked as a cigarette girl at the Royal York Hotel, and not that anyone liked this but it was excused that and accepted that, men could kind of fondle the women as they went by. And she's not saying it wasn't, well, she is sort of saying it wasn't that big a deal. You just kind of accepted that this was part of the culture. And Roz's take on that is that then, though, you knew it was wrong, but men just did it anyway because they wanted to assert their power.
Mm-hmm.
So in situations in the 60s, I remember having this conversation with my parents. People knew how to conduct themselves publicly, privately. There was certainly a lot of, misconduct and misogyny. But in the 90s, the power imbalance was confusing, I think, because there was this real double standard and this kind of dishonesty surrounding my university experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, universities were admitting more women than men. We were a generation that had grown up on like free to be you and me, and we could be anything we wanted to be. And it's not that was false, but the environment we were socialized in university, like the way we partied and joked, there was a lot of sort of sexism and chauvinism in that. And instead of everybody knowing it was disrespectful, we all kind of just thought it was the way it was. I mean, it was just kind of the humor was just considered sort of edgy, and, we laughed at it and thought in some ways that we were, it's hard to describe, but almost like above criticizing it for being sexist because sexism didn't exist anymore. That was kind of the way I think a lot of us kind of perceived our experiences. And yet, meanwhile, any woman who was seen to be promiscuous received a lot of shame, whereas the same wasn't true for men.
Yeah.
I remember once sort of hearing a man described as being like, well, he's kind of a male slut. And that was like, oh, this must be really bad then.
Right.
And yeah, like, men would dress up as women, sometimes as a joke in this like really sexualized way. And that was really hilarious to see them sort of like letting go of power like that. But, a woman dressing up as a man for a party wasn't funny or interesting. I mean, there's just countless examples that I felt a little, looking back, I feel like I didn't really understand the threat of that, and the way I was kind of internalizing that.
Yeah. I mean, my experience, I did my 20s in the 90s, and that, I didn't go to university in the 90s, but I did my 20s in the 90s. And I sort of feel like, and you mentioned slut, it's like the, any sexual activity in the 80s when I was in high school, any sexual activity you participated in, you were a slut. Like it was just kind of like there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you were having sex in high school, you were a slut. But in the 90s, it like evolved a little bit. And I know you're saying the opposite, but I sort of felt like Roz was talking about how the pride of sexual experience in the 90s kind of overshadowed how that experience happened, right? And like you're proud to say, oh my God, I was so drunk, you're not going to believe what I did, or and that kind of pride overshadowed the actual experience, which is why maybe why, and you can share your thoughts on this, maybe why so many women who experienced stuff in the 90s were just like swallowing the bad part and exploiting, the good part.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think exactly, and I think that to your point, part of this idea is of we're all equal is women did feel empowered to have casual sex.
Mm-hmm.
But but there was it still didn't feel like something you could do without limit. It was still kind of carefully managed. You couldn't be sleeping with everybody because that was slutty.
Mm-hmm.
But and even the whole idea of I was so drunk, I don't know if I had sex or not. That's like because you're kind of trying to distance your own agency from that choice.
Yeah.
You may or may not have had sex because you were so drunk, not because you wanted to have sex. I mean, God forbid, like you would be driving that show. It's like
Right.
something accidentally that happened to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Memory plays a big part in this book, as Roz alludes to in the prologue and in the opening pages. What she remembers, how she remembers, if something happened, if it didn't happen, plays a big part in this. And I love, there's a moment when she says, "I saw the Titanic that day twice," which I was like, exactly, like our memories are so tethered to these concrete things, right? Like anytime I think of Purple Rain, I'm like in a certain neighborhood in Toronto. Every time, that memory is tethered to these concrete things. And I also kind of started thinking, okay, what is the symbolism of the Titanic? Because as an early reader, and lover of reading, being forced in high school to explain the symbolism of things that show up in novels, was irritating. So now I'm going to do that to you. I'm going to ask you if there's any symbolism in not just the Titanic, but you mentioned a bunch of pop culture things, movies, television shows, music. If there's any, related symbolism to that, or if it was just sort of extracted from your own experience.
That particular detail was extracted from my own experience. So during the ice storm, I was in university in January 1998 during an ice storm. And there was very little power in the city. Most of it was blacked out, but of the main drag, the side that had the movie theater on it, there was power on one side of the street. And so we went to see Titanic twice. And so I remember that. And it was a detail I could, lend the story with authenticity. But I mean, I think it did. I did think about this idea of like a sinking ship, which Roz is kind of on at this point. She is kind of being swallowed up by the lies that are beginning to accumulate and sink her reputation. So there was some sort of convenience to that, but I wasn't looking for a symbol to represent that. It was just, I thought, kind of after I got that detail down, that okay, that has sort of another possibility. And also it opened up the chance to add the story of Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton into the narrative, which was also something that was swirling at that time. That story was breaking in the media, and I was able to kind of attach that to the Titanic too.
Yeah, I love that books, set in past times are historical documents and, reminders, especially for someone who lived through it, and also, informational for people who didn't live through it. But I was surprised when I was reading the pandemic stuff. And again, this speaks to memory and all everything. I was surprised in reading stuff that I was like, oh yeah, kids didn't go to school. Oh yeah, kids were still like in myself, in having experienced it literally in the last 3 years, and yet I was reading some of the pandemic stuff and going, right, God, it's only, 2 years since we were doing that, or 3 years since we were doing that. How do you feel about writing a book? And not just because it's set in 1998, but also writing a book that exists through the pandemic, and it acting as a historical document, something that, likely in 30 or 40 years, people are going to read to better understand the pandemic of 2020.
Yeah, I was writing it during the pandemic. Specifically, I was writing the second half during the pandemic. So that so I was infusing the story with details that I was experiencing in real time. Though I did at certain points consider, should I just back up by a year? Should this be should this be 2019? Is it just sort of too confusing? Because the other thing was, back in the summer of 2020, which is when part 2 takes place, we didn't, we were still only 4 or 5 months into the pandemic. We didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't know we'd be wearing masks for another couple of years. We didn't know when vaccinations would come out. We had no idea what was in store. And also, we didn't know if basically this was such a small blip that might be forgotten a year down the road. And so why put such a fine point on it in the book? So I wasn't sure, but I went ahead and wrote it as I was experiencing it. And it did sort of stick. At the time, I hadn't seen very much. I mean, I wouldn't have seen very much with the pandemic in it. And even in the year following, now, there are lots of short stories and media, TV, where we know we're in 2020 to now, and there are masks and those details. But I couldn't have known that would happen. So I thought I was making a pretty original move, but probably alongside everyone else who was creating content in 2020 to capture that period in time.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. And as I said, it'll be relevant, 100% relevant for people who want to talk about this time in the future. I have a couple more questions. I just want to, no, I always forget to invite other people to ask questions. This isn't just me asking all of my questions. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Kaylee will collate them and ask them on your behalf. But it's also okay not to have questions. I don't want anyone to feel forced. I wanted to talk to you about the structure. You just mentioned that it's written in the now and the before. I want to talk to you just about that writerly choice instead of kind of having it today and not necessarily flashbacking, but having that going back and forth thing. What made you decide to write 1998 and 2020?
Well, 1998, she's looking back, but I did want to create this. I really did want to kind of immerse us in that time, because I thought, okay, if this story has any kind of like thriller component, it's here, and I want the reader to feel that tension.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, and I'd always sort of wanted to write an ice storm book, just from my own personal experience, having lived through an ice storm in 1998 in university. And we had a great time, even though every kind of newspaper was reporting massive damage and devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was also true. But in our dorms, we were recklessly partying and getting to know each other really well, and kind of bonding through this disaster. So I always thought that would be like a fun thing to write about. And I wanted to capture it kind of as it was. So I wanted that. But then I also wanted to have there be a reason to be telling this story, kind of looking back on it. So that's why I decided to do it in two parts.
Yeah.
And I kept the parts separate, I think, because at the beginning because I didn't want to hint too much at like what happened later, because I wanted us to honestly not know what occurred to Megan in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of end it being confused and pass through decades of that sort of confusion, the way Roz does, the way the main character does. So I think that was really the main reason. And I kind of set it up so that she's telling the story back to herself as she's thinking about what she may or may not tell the lawyer who has contacted her
Right.
about that week in 1998. So she's kind of reviewing the details in her mind, which gives us that story before leaping to what she does with that story, the decisions and choices she makes around what she knows.
Yeah. And that in that decision, I felt like this, in when you have a first person narrator, this is probably too writerly a thing, but having a first person narrator who does go back in time, sometimes there tends to be a lot of exposition, which I actually like a lot of exposition, but you really balanced it. And I think you just spoke about it, in immersing everyone in the scene, in the moment. When you sat down to originally write it in first draft, did you like chronologically tell the beginning, chronologically tell the end, or did you just write scene by scene?
I don't really remember.
Just going to continue record.
Yeah,
I'll miss that last section of your of what you said, but I'll add a little a few words when I put if I can figure out how to edit that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can always ask me after.
Yeah. Okay, so I will ask Kaylee's computer. The text I got just said my computer just totally combusted. So we'll sit and wait for her. But if anyone has any questions, I'm not sure if you put anything in the chat for Kaylee or not. I can't see anything in the chat. So I will just continue. Please feel free. There she is. Feel free to write something in the chat if you want to. But oh, here we go. Yes. Ooh, this is I think this is a complicated question, to be honest. Curious about Lucas, the husband. I don't know if you can answer that. Do you think you can answer that with
Um,
without spoiling anything? We'll go
see
with
what
this.
you
I
mean.
wonder about the choice to fictionalize the town and university. Was that because of potential legal issues or something else? I absolutely loved the tension in the first part of the book. Page Turner, I was racked with stress.
Okay.
That was from Tamara. Thanks, Tamara.
So the fictionalizing of the town, I think, well, I chose to fictionalize it because I wanted to make stuff up. I wanted to have the liberty to make it to change it. So the setting is based on Queen's University in Kingston,
Mhm.
which is where I went, and a lot of people can identify it. But it wasn't like a legal thing because I'm not suggesting that, like, I'm not suggesting anything particular about Queens. I don't think. I mean, from what I understand from my friends who went to different universities, and my sister's experience and my friends here in the US, this culture being described was pretty ubiquitous, and a lot of people can relate to that environment. So it wasn't Queens specific. But also in creating Regis and in recreating the ice storm, there were things that, yeah, I wanted to have. I didn't want to be beholden to the truth. I wanted to
Mhm.
add things, the way things went down. For example, like we didn't. In many ways, things were better organized in the book than they were in quote unquote real life. Like during the ice storm, because we were never placed in a buddy system. We weren't sent home on buses. I mean, people were welcome to take the bus home and encouraged to do so. But there was no sort of like check and balance about that I recall. And yeah, just like other details of how the residences worked or what they were like, I made up. So it's sort of a hodgepodge. Um,
I will say there was, I can't remember where it was in the novel, but something about Regis having a reputation for something. I can't
oh,
I can't remember what it was, but
yeah,
in that moment, I was like, okay, it has to be Queens.
I think it's the party hard and play hard thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
So I don't know if I mean I guess it's probably because I knew some people who went to Queens and I likely didn't know anyone who went to any Eastern because this was only an Eastern Ontario ice storm thing. We didn't have the same experience in Southern Ontario. So in trying to figure out what university it was, you're limited to a handful
East of Kingston, yeah, in
yeah,
Kingston. But Ottawa, like Montreal, McGill, like a lot of those universities were
yeah,
impacted to the same degree, if not worse.
yeah, yeah. Um, I
But with
have,
the
I,
other, oh, sorry, yeah, the Lucas question.
yeah, curious about Lucas, the husband writer character. He was slimy and yet realistic.
Was there an element of irony in creating him? I mean, I guess it depends what's meant by irony here, but I want, yeah, satire.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to understand why Roz was with him. Because I know it is a little confusing. I mean, he's not a great partner. And yet they get along kind of on some fundamental level. I mean, she did eventually, well, I don't want to give too much away. But I wanted people to understand that it wasn't all flaw in Roz that explained their connection.
Mhm.
That they did have something, not the right ingredients to build a long-term relationship around, but something that I wanted people to sort of get why she hung on to,
Mhm.
why she hung on to it, because she she admired him for a long time. She thought he was the best that she was going to get. And he was ambitious and good looking and um, becoming famous. I wanted it to make sense that she continued to kind of like hitch her wagon to him, even though he wasn't good for her, because not, much had changed about her opinion of her own kind of worth.
Yeah. And he's the father of her son.
Of course.
Which I thought was great. I think have been tons of conversations swirling around, in the last 2 decades anyway, likely before that, but that's my experience as a mom, about how to raise boys to be men who don't behave like Harvey Weinstein, right? Like,
Yes.
how do we raise boys and not excuse their behavior in that, like, boys will be boys, men will be men kind of way? Was it, again, likely because of your own personal experience, but did you choose a boy kid for Roz consciously?
I think actually, I mean, maybe eventually I went with a boy for that reason, because I had been thinking about raising boys as as feminists, and understanding what sort of conversations that would involve. Though in my very, very, very first draft, they had a daughter. So, but
even that's probably an even more complicated conversation, right? Yeah.
But yeah, I think it did help me kind of process things to write about Roz and her son, and think about, kind of my son is only 6 years old, but to think about my own kind of journey ahead.
Yeah. And that I was just having this conversation with writer friends about that conversation, shockingly, but importantly, needs to happen the minute you start talking about sex, which is like so challenging to think about, but also important to talk about, I think. George and Jillian have, but were you making fun of male author tropes? Oh, I get it now.
Oh, with Luke.
Making fun of Lucas as
not really. I mean, although again, as research, I mean, I did read a bunch of articles about, about powerful men and misconduct. And so as he was shaping in my mind, I was probably taking on some of those characteristics.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't taking them on. The character of Lucas was taking them on.
Right. And that, I won't take this personally, Brian. Upon releasing the book, how did you prepare to field reader and interview questions on such a challenging and personal issue as sexual assault? It must be difficult as an author fielding questions while not being a professional in the field. It's a valid question.
Yeah, I was really nervous about questions about the content. And I practiced questions a little bit with my editor and publicist at Random House. One thing that really kind of helped me sort out my thinking of what I wanted to say was I wrote a kind of story behind the story document at an early point. And I think it's Joan Didion said that, like, she never knows what she thinks until she writes it down. And I could write this fiction, but I didn't really know, like, how to state my position on anything I'd written. So kind of writing down the story behind the story really kind of helped me to feel more comfortable articulating like the ideas and themes I was trying to get across with this. And then that I think.
Yeah,
What
I think
I just
I think that's actually great to I guess mitigate because I know a lot of authors, when we sit and talk, they don't actually remember certain sections of a novel, or in a question is kind of a reminder that they wrote that. And I think that writing a story behind the story is a really good idea for any of us, right? Who are letting the pen kind of do its thing when you're sitting down and creating a story, because sometimes it does. I'm sure there's science behind it. I'm sure there's like this unconscious thing that, all this stuff comes out of you, and then at the end of it, you're like, I have no idea where that came from.
yeah, but I've got to think of something.
because somebody's going to ask me.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to ask me where that came from, and I have no idea. That's fantastic. Thank you. Right. Kaylee's just reminding me in the chat. Thank you very much, Kaylee, to not go into thanking everybody for coming and all the frenetic thing that I do with forgetting to do the raffle.
Oh, yes. Okay.
We have Penguin Random House generously gave us 2 copies of the Damages to raffle off. We're going to raffle off one here today, and one of them is going to be included in a kind of bigger book raffle at our event at the end of November. For anybody who's in town on November 26th, we're going to be back at Junction, at Type Books in the Junction. With Sophia Mostagimi, Moez Serrani, and Jenny Lee Austria Bonifacio. So if you're around, feel free to join us. You might also be able to win a copy of the Damages. So Kaylee, let's do that raffle.
Sorry, I was trying to bring myself up, but when my computer crashed, I don't have host abilities anymore. So you can hear my voice. And I will let you know who our winner is. Our winner for today is Laura Jackson. Congratulations, Laura.
I just made you co-host. I'm sorry. I completely forgot to do that. Congratulations. Is it Laura?
Thank you. It's Lara.
Lara.
It's so funny. I just ordered one from, and I gave my copy to a friend, and I just ordered another replacement during the call from Indigo, and I will take that one as well and give it to another friend. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. I was going to say you can actually nominate it to be mailed directly to whomever, or
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just send me an email to junctionrights@gmail.com.
Thank you.
And let me know where, if it's anywhere in Toronto, I can just drop it off to them directly. If it is outside of Toronto, I can mail it off.
Thank you.
And thanks for buying a copy, Lara.
I got my first copy from Lori Jessam. I'm her colleague at work.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then I bought a copy because I gave my copy to a friend, and now I'm happy to get another copy. So thank you. I loved it. It very much captured Queens at that time period for me in a very genuine and uncomfortable, but really well written way. So thank you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much to everybody for joining us on this Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, if you're in California or anywhere else across Turtle Island. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Sorry your computer died. And good luck tomorrow. Let's all say good luck to Kaylee tomorrow. She has an author at the Gillers tomorrow night. So fingers crossed for that. And thank you so much, Jen, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I also want to say happy birthday to my dad. His birthday.
Happy birthday, Graham.
Scott. His birthday is tomorrow. So wanted to wish happy birthday to him.
Is he still here?
I think he's still here. Maybe not. His name is still there.
Oh, okay.
But
Yay,
thank
happy
you so much.
birthdays
It was
from
wonderful
everybody
to see
coming
you
in.
all here, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful to chat with you, Alison, and to see you again.
Thank you so much. And everybody, if you want more information on upcoming events, just go to our website, junctionreads.ca, and you can, again, find out more about Genevieve at genevievescott.com. And that is it. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good luck with the book and the next one. I'm excited that you got a 2-book deal, so we'll keep an eye out for that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.